Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Christian Music Wars podcast with Brendan and Brandon. Once again, I'm Brendan, and Brandon's unfortunately not here today. He had to work. He sends his best regards, and he hopes you all are doing well. And he'll see you next time. And he's in the process of moving, so please keep him in your prayers. He's getting a new house, so we'll see how that goes for him. Today, I am with a very special guest. I'm not going to say who it is. I'm going to let him introduce himself. So go ahead.
Hey folks, my name's Eddie DeGarmo. Some of you will remember that peculiar last name from a group that I was in the 70s and 80s called DeGarmo Key. And anyway, it's good to be with you guys today, and let's talk about all this stuff. I'm ready.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us. I know we've been to go back and forth like a couple times trying to figure it out days. One time we lost power, you lost power, and then
Yeah,
tour
man.
dates, everything. So thank you again for joining us. Let's just start nice and easy. You said you were part of a band called DeGarmo Key. For those who are listening from like 2000, you're listening to like all the modern Christian. If you go back to about your dad's time and mom's time, you'll hear their wonderful music too. Can you tell us a little bit about your music background?
Ouch. Well, ouch, ouch. Well, let's go all the way back. So I was born in Detroit, and my mother played piano in our little church up there in a place called Royal Oak outside of Detroit. And she started me playing piano probably about the age of three, maybe something like that. Seems like I'd be better than I am today. So, but she started me really early. And my family moved from Detroit to Memphis, Tennessee in 1959, a long time ago. And the place that we moved had, I think, probably a lot to do with just, the way that I viewed music is that I grew up pretty much across the street from Elvis Presley's Graceland. And I mean, even going through school as a little kid, my school bus would go by there and, Elvis would be out riding his horses or his motorcycle or this and that. So for me, I mean, rock and roll looked like a pretty easy lifestyle,
Mhm.
pretty glamorous lifestyle, one that I wanted to be part of. So I kind of dedicated myself to playing music. I mean, when I was really young, second, third grade type stuff. Uh, my older brother played guitar. And when I was in the fifth grade, my dad, which is this pretty funny story, he's the good Southern Baptist. He went to the West Memphis dog track and he won $1,200. And that was in 1964. He bought me went out the next day. It's probably because he was guilty, the sin and the gambling and stuff. Who knows? But he bought me this little combo organ that at that time all the really cool British bands used,
Mhm.
and they call it Farfisa. For you guys that are like sonic aficionados, you would know about those. And so my brother and I started a little dance band, and this would have been 1964, 1965. Well, over the next 6 or 8 years, music became a big part of my life, big serious part of my life. I left that band and formed a band in the sixth grade with my good friend Dana Key. We met in the first grade. Let's go way back. And, when we were in the fourth grade, we decided we were going to do a band as soon as we were old enough. So we were called the Sound Corporation. We actually entered ourselves into a talent contest, the Mid South Fair, and came in second because we didn't have a show, which I learned a lot that day because the band that won wasn't near as good as us, but they had a visual show. Big deal. So when I was 15 years old, the band progressed and we started playing around town and we were on, the local radio stations and TV stations somewhat. And when I was 15, we were approached by a large record company called High Records and London Records, which had some huge artists in those days. They had the Rolling Stones, they had ZZ Top, they had Eddie Money, some others. And they signed us to a record contract at the ripe old age of 15. So we were going about our merry way and we were making our music. And, we were in a 10-piece soul band in those days. I mean, this is way back, right? I
Mhm.
mean, I'm an old guy. So this is way back during the Vietnam War. And I had two older brothers that were in the service, and one of them was in Vietnam and one of them was in Germany. Well, the one from Germany came home from the service, would have been like 1972, a very different kind of guy, not in a good way. He actually bought a big motorcycle and started riding with a motorcycle gang. And I was playing in my dance band, and we were playing around town, and we were doing whatever we would do. My parents had to sign a form so I could get into nightclubs and play music, you know. And I came home from a concert one night, or a gig. It wasn't a concert in those days, just a gig, I guess. And came home and walked into my house. Our brother that was in Germany was living with us after he was out of the service. And I saw this silhouette sitting at our breakfast table, and I turned the lights on, and it was my brother. He was sitting in the dark. And on one side of the table in front of him, he had a Bible. And on the other side of the table, he had a bottle of Jack Daniels whiskey, which I guess that represented all that was evil to him, or maybe where he was at in his life, who knows. But I said, what are you doing out here all by yourself? It's 2 o'clock in the morning. You're sitting in the dark with a Bible and a bottle of whiskey. He goes, sit down, man. I need to tell you a story. So I sat down, and he started telling me this story about when he was in the army in Germany. He had gone to a Bible study. And during this Bible study, he had given his life to Jesus Christ. And how when he got out of the service and came back home, he was kind of embarrassed about it, and he was afraid to tell me or tell, my mom and dad or tell his friends about it. And so he just spent the next 3 months trying to forget it. And then he said something to me that I'll never forget. He said, Eddie, he said, God won't let me go. He said, he just won't let me go. And I said, well, that's cool. I mean, that's really good for you, man. I'm glad that you're wising up, And I didn't know anything about what I was talking about. But the next day, he sold his motorcycle and kind of cleaned his act up, started going to church. And then he started telling me about this Jesus, of whom, I grew up in the South.
Mhm.
So I was a Southern Baptist. I mean, I was in the buckle of the Bible Belt. So I knew about that stuff. But I really had never taken Christ seriously enough to have a personal rapport with him,
Mhm.
on a daily basis. I mean, you can do that. I never knew that was feasible. I just thought it was kind of a far off God that watched us down here on this little planet. So over the next few months, he began to witness to me so much that I got tired of it. I mean, we actually got in fist fights over it, pretty
Mhm.
crazy. And I came home from a gig one night, again in the middle of the night, and he was up, and he said, "Hey, would you go to church with me? There's this really, I think, cool guy that's talking at church that you might really enjoy." I said, "It's late, man. It's like 3 in the morning, 2 in the morning, whatever." So he said, I'm just telling you. He said, if you do this with me, he said, I'll quit bugging you about all this. So that was the bell that went off in my head. Great, let's do it.
Mhm.
So I went to church with him that Sunday morning, and it was a pastor. He's passed away since then, named David Wilkerson. Written a bunch of books. Actually, wrote a couple about me later on, but and not he wasn't a fan of our music anyway. But during that day, during that morning service, he was a good speaker. I saw a guy play guitar in church. I'd never seen that before. A guy named Dallas Holm turned out to be a friend of mine later. Had a couple of big songs in the late '70s, early '80s, and so there was a bunch of bands playing in a park in Memphis. So I said to my brother, I said, "Hey, bro, I went with you to church. Would you go with me and see these bands play?" And he said, "Sure." So we went out to the park, and I saw one of my best friends on stage, one of my good friends. He wasn't my best friend on stage. And you know what feedback is? It was the PA was squealing and it was really
Mhm.
loud. And they finally fixed it and cut it off. And he went to the microphone and he just dropped the biggest F bomb in the world.
Mhm.
And I was standing right there with my brother. And I'm telling you, and as crazy as this sounds, it's all of a sudden my eyes were kind of open to who I was and what I was and who my brother was and who he is. And I started thinking about all this Jesus talk. And I saw Dana Key, my friend and future partner in DeGarmo Key. He walked up to me, and he was obviously stoned out of his mind. So he said, "Hey, where you been, man? We've been waiting on you all day." And I was like, "Man, I went to church." He goes, "Man, forget that." So anyway, I couldn't take it. I was like, my eyes had been opened to all this.
Yeah.
So um, we left. My brother and I left, and I went back to that same church that evening, and I heard a story I'd never heard before. The preacher was talking about that there's going to be a time that Jesus is going to come back and take over this planet. And I'm like, man, he's been here before. Why does he need to come back? And all I knew is that I was scared out of my mind about that thought. And it bugged me that I was frightened to face Jesus. I was like, well, man, I mean, I grew up, I got baptized. I mean, I believe, I mean, why is this bugging me so much that I'm afraid of Jesus? I shouldn't be afraid of him, but I am. So I went down the aisle that night, and the pastor had given an invitation, an altar call, what some of us would call. And I went down and I said, "Hey, man, I want to find out more about this Jesus." So I went back in this counseling room, and this fellow that was playing guitar, Dallas Holm, talked to me, and he said, you need to give everything to Jesus and just ask him to forgive you of your sins and come into your life and change you. And it was kind of that simple. And so I did. I did that evening, March 8th, 1972. And I went home that night, and I got down next to my bed, and I'm not an emotional kind of guy, but I actually wept, but not because I was happy, because I was pretty sure I'd screwed my life up. Right? What have I done to myself? Anyway, I woke up the next morning and I felt better about it the next morning. Went to school. I was a senior in high school. Saw my friend Dana Key walking down the hallway. Said to him, "Dana, I got to talk to you. You're not going to believe what happened. I found Jesus." And he said, "I didn't know he was missing." So I said, "I'm serious. I got to talk to you about this." So I actually skipped school with Dana. Didn't know you weren't supposed to do that as a Christian, I guess. So
It was just a
we,
senior skip day.
yeah, so I skipped school and I just started telling him about what had happened to me the day before. And he said an amazing thing to me. He said, "I'm going through the same stuff you're talking about." And he said, "I want to know this Jesus also." So I prayed with Dana in a closet of all places. There was a light in there. There was on a, but it wasn't totally dark. But prayed with him in a closet while we were skipping school in one of the janitor's closets off of the hallway so we wouldn't be found. We'd skip class, and we were waiting till we could get our big break, get outside and go in the parking lot. And he gave his life to Jesus in that closet. So that's how this started, and the whole thing about Christian music and Jesus music, they called it in those days. I didn't know anything about that. I just knew how to play rock music, rock and roll music. And Dana and I just started writing songs about what had happened to us.
Mm-hmm.
And over the next few months, everybody else said, "Well, that's like Jesus rock music, God rock," or they call it. They didn't know what to call it. So that's how we started playing what today is known as Christian music.
Thank you for sharing that. That's very cool. And from there, you guys perform many albums, many hit singles. Can you tell us do you have a favorite album that sticks with you after all these years?
Well, that's kind of like choosing one of your children,
Yeah,
favorite album. I don't know that I could say that. I mean, the
that's
first one was certainly special. The album critics, a lot of those guys like our second album a lot, called Straight On. They like one of our albums called The Pledge a lot. Um,
Mhm.
we made an album called Streetlight that a lot of the fans still talk about. And when I look on YouTube, there's a lot of D&K videos on YouTube. And I show them to my grandkids now, and they're like, "Man, what were you thinking?" Because I had all the crazy hair, and
Yeah.
and the crazy clothes, and of course I was young and beautiful, right? That's what we do.
Brandon
So
wanted Brandon wanted me to ask you, speaking of hair, Brandon wanted me to ask you, do you ever miss your long, crazy hair?
that's a lot of work, man. I mean, it was part of who I was back in those days. But man, to maintain long hair, that's a lot of work. You got to be committed to that.
Yeah. Yeah. Brandon's a hair guru, as everyone that's listening to this podcast knows. You can see Brandon's hair. It's fun when we watch our podcast episodes to hear progresses and we all like to just talk about his hair.
I would call him a hair farmer. That's what my wife used to call me.
And then Forefront Records, you started Forefront Records. Can you tell us a little bit how you started out? Like, how did you come across like artists like DC Talk and Audio Adrenaline and all that?
Well, in the late '80s, me and started with three other partners. Dana Key was one of them, and our manager Dan Brock, and a guy that we had met that had produced a couple of our albums named Ron Griffin, wanted to form a little small record label that made records exclusively for, in those days, what was the MTV audience, which is like 12 to 19, basically. There was no record label that was really focused on the youth movement. And we wanted to make records that was really focused on the youth movement. And so we formed an independent record label called Forefront Records. And one of our very few artists that we signed was this group called DC Talk. And we had been looking for a rap group, and DC Talk kind of fit the bill because they sang their choruses. And we thought that was really important because it gave youth groups, which were a big part of marketing. I mean, it sounds so crass to call it a youth group being a big part of marketing,
Mhm.
but Christian radio wouldn't play rap music in those days. And so we needed a vehicle to promote DC Talk. And because they sang their choruses, the youth groups could sing the music. So, and then that label grew and grew and grew. We signed Audio Adrenaline. Later we signed Rebecca St. James and Skillet and Big Tent Revival and Jeff Moore in the Distance and Code of Ethics. And, you
Mhm.
know, by the time that in the mid '90s, that was the largest independent record label of Christian music in the entire world. So I had crazy successful run there with Forefront Records, and made a very difficult decision in 1996 to sell that label to a big entertainment company, and we continued to operate it and to run it. But so many of our groups wanted to be on mainstream radio, wanted to be on mainstream video networks, and we weren't really set up to promote that way. So that's why we sold it.
That's completely fair. And you just brought up Rebecca St. James, and you're portrayed in the Unsung Hero movie. Have you seen the new Unsung Hero movie?
Oh yeah, man, I saw it. I saw the day they were shooting that, and they had this guy playing me. He did a pretty good job, I thought.
Yeah. So that the question was, how was the portrayal? Did you like your portrayal?
I thought he did good. He. I went up there the day that he was shooting some of his stuff. That movie was
Mhm.
shot in Louisville, Kentucky. A lot of it was, and I went up there that day, and he asked me. Jonathan Jackson's the actor's name, and for some of you that followed shows like Nashville, or he was, gosh, I think he was on General Hospital forever, and he's been in a bunch of movies. But he said, "So if I could portray you a certain way, what would that be?" And I said, "Well, bro," I said, "I grew up in Memphis." I said, "Anything in Memphis that's cool is kind of low and slow." So I said, "Just do low and slow, and you'll get it." And he did. He did. I thought he did a nice job.
He was one of my more favorite characters in the movie. Like watch out portrayals. I think it was one of the better ones from that
It's
movie.
pretty fun. I mean, I
Mhm.
saw it with my family the first time. Of course, there was, cat calls and crazy laughter when he came on the screen. So,
Mhm. Um, we just have a few more minutes with you today. We like to give our guests the floor about to say anything they want or bring up anything they want. So we would like to give you the floor. You have a book out and everything that people can order too to hear more
yeah,
about your story.
get it on Amazon. It's called Rebel for God. And after Forefront, I mean, I went on to run a business called Capital Christian Music Group Publishing, and got very involved with writers that write modern worship music like Chris Tomlin Matt Redman and Tim Hughes and Bill Song and
Mhm.
all those guys. So had a lot of good memories of that and writing those songs that traveled the world. So
Awesome. Um, Eddie, thank you for joining me today. It was a great to have you. And everyone that's watching, make sure to follow Eddie. You can find his music on Spotify. You can find YouTube videos. You can order his book and hear more about his story. You can see the portrayal of him in Unsung Hero. If you haven't, Brad and I recommend that movie. And we'll see you all next time on a Christian Music World podcast.
thank you.
Take care, everyone.